I received the invitation on a quiet Tuesday afternoon while sitting by the kitchen window with a cup of tea warming my hands. The sun was beginning to sink behind the houses across the street, spreading a soft golden light across my small garden. My phone rang suddenly on the table, and when I saw Daniel's name on the screen, my heart lifted the way it always did when my son called. Daniel had been busy since his marriage to Lily, and our conversations had become less frequent than they once were, but I still treasured every moment we spoke. When I answered, his voice sounded friendly but slightly careful, like someone walking across the ice. He told me that he and Lily were organizing a family dinner at a new upscale restaurant downtown. "Mom, it's important to Lily," he explained gently. "Her mother will be there too." The moment he mentioned Lily's mother, Margaret, I felt a quiet heaviness settle inside my chest. Margaret had always been known for her sarcastic humor, the kind that made everyone laugh except the person she was targeting. From the first day we met, she had treated conversations like small competitions, always trying to appear sharper, richer, or more impressive than the person sitting across from her. Over time, her comments had often turned toward me, sometimes disguised as jokes, sometimes not even bothering to hide the insult. Still, I didn't want to create tension between Daniel and his wife, so I agreed to attend the dinner. Family peace had always mattered to me more than pride. That evening I arrived at the restaurant a little early. The place was elegant, with tall glass windows, warm golden lights, and quiet music playing softly through hidden speakers. The air carried the rich aroma of roasted meat, fresh bread, and herbs. When I stepped inside, a host greeted me politely and led me toward a large table near the center of the dining room. Daniel, Lily, and several members of Lily's family were already seated there, laughing and talking. Margaret sat comfortably at the head of the table, her posture relaxed, as though the entire restaurant belonged to her. When she noticed me approaching, she raised her eyebrows slightly and smiled with a hint of amusement. "Well, look who decided to join us," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Daniel's mom actually came. I thought she might be too busy counting pennies. Several people laughed immediately, including Lily. I forced a polite smile and greeted everyone before taking the empty seat Daniel had saved for me. Daniel squeezed my shoulder briefly, but he quickly returned his attention to the conversation around the table. The waiter arrived with menus, placing them in front of each of us before explaining the restaurant's special dishes for the evening. As I opened the menu, I noticed the prices were quite high, but that didn't surprise me. Lily enjoyed elegant places, and Margaret clearly loved environments where she could show off. While we studied the menus, Margaret leaned back in her chair and said casually, "Careful what you order tonight. Some people might faint when they see the prices." Again, the table laughed. I remained quiet, pretending to focus on the menu. Throughout the evening, small sarcastic remarks continued slipping from Margaret's mouth, always wrapped in humor, but always aimed in my direction. I reminded myself that I had come here for Daniel, not to argue. But somewhere deep inside, I could feel that the evening was slowly moving toward something more uncomfortable than a few careless jokes. At first, the dinner appeared perfectly normal. After the waiter collected our menus and took our orders, conversation began to flow around the table. People talked about vacations, work stories, and family plans for the upcoming holidays. The restaurant buzzed with quiet energy as other diners enjoyed their meals, and for a brief moment I thought perhaps Margaret would limit herself to a few harmless comments and allow the evening to continue peacefully. Unfortunately, that hope didn't last long. Margaret lifted her wine glass, took a slow sip, and then leaned slightly toward Lily while glancing at me. "I always find family dinners fascinating," she said thoughtfully. "You really see how differently people live." A few people nodded politely, assuming she was making a general observation. Then she continued, her voice playful but pointed. "Some families are used to places like this. Others, well, they might feel a bit overwhelmed." Lily chuckled softly, clearly understanding exactly who the comment was directed at. I kept my expression neutral and focused on cutting a small piece of food on my plate. Moments later, Margaret spoke again. "That dress you're wearing is very vintage," she said, examining me as if I were a display in a store window. Did you buy it recently, or have you been saving it since the 80s? The table erupted in laughter. I felt warmth creep into my cheeks, but kept my posture straight. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair beside Lily, though he still didn't speak. Margaret seemed encouraged by the reaction and continued with her performance. I suppose classic styles never really go out of fashion, she added with a dramatic shrug. Some people just stay loyal to the past. Lily laughed again, covering her mouth while several cousins exchanged amused glances. I realized that if I stayed silent much longer, the jokes would only grow worse. So I gently placed my fork on the table and looked at Margaret calmly. "Margaret," I said in a steady voice, "your jokes are getting a little personal." The laughter around the table faded quickly. Margaret raised her eyebrows as though she had just heard something ridiculous. "Oh dear," she replied lightly. "I was only joking." Before she could continue, Lily suddenly leaned forward with a look of irritation on her face. The tone of the evening shifted instantly, as if someone had quietly turned the temperature in the room from warm to cold. Lily crossed her arms and looked straight at me, her expression firm and unapologetic. "If you don't like my mom's sarcastic jokes," she said coldly, "you can pay the bill and leave." The entire table fell silent. The words seemed to hang in the air like a sudden storm cloud. I slowly turned my head toward Daniel, searching his face for some sign that he would step in and stop this before it went any further. "Daniel," I said quietly, "do you agree with that?" He hesitated, glancing briefly at Lily before looking down at the table. The moment stretched painfully as everyone waited for his response. I saw the struggle in his eyes, the silent battle between defending his mother and keeping peace with his wife. Finally, he sighed and spoke in a low voice. "Mom, let's not ruin the evening." Those words hurt more than Lily's ultimatum. They suggested that I was the problem simply for objecting to being mocked. I felt a sharp ache in my chest, but I refused to show anger. Instead, I calmly reached for my purse beside my chair. The waiter approached with the leather bill folder, placing it gently on the table. For a moment, I looked at it without speaking. The total printed on the receipt was enormous, reflecting the expensive wine, appetizers, and desserts that had been ordered throughout the night. Lily watched me expectantly, clearly confident that she had won the moment. Margaret leaned back with a satisfied smile. Slowly, I removed my credit card from my purse and placed it inside the folder. The waiter picked it up and walked away to process the payment. When he returned, I signed the receipt without hesitation. Then I stood up, lifted my purse onto my shoulder, and looked around the table one final time. "I hope you all enjoy the rest of your dinner," I said calmly. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the exit. The restaurant door opened quietly as I stepped outside into the cool night air. Behind me, the conversations inside resumed as though nothing significant had happened. Margaret leaned toward Lily and whispered proudly, "Well, that solved that problem." But they didn't realize the story was far from over. The next morning, Daniel called me, his voice tense and uncertain. "Mom, something strange happened," he said. I listened quietly as he explained that the restaurant had contacted them about the payment from the night before. According to the manager, the charge had been reversed. I smiled faintly as I held the phone to my ear. "Yes," I replied calmly. "That's correct." Daniel sounded confused. "Why would they reverse it?" he asked. I walked slowly to the window and looked outside at the quiet street. "Because, Daniel," I said gently, "I didn't actually pay for the dinner." There was a long pause on the line. "What do you mean you didn't pay?" he asked. "I reserved that restaurant for a private business dinner with the owner," I explained. When the manager realized the situation, he voided the charge. Daniel's voice lowered with shock. "You know the owner?" "Yes," I said. "Very well." Another silence followed before Daniel asked carefully, "Then who paid for the dinner?" I took a slow breath before answering. The restaurant still needed someone to cover the bill. Since the reservation was under Lily's name for the family dinner, the charge was transferred to her. 2 days later, Lily knocked on my door. When I opened it, she looked nothing like the confident woman who had spoken to me at the restaurant. Her posture was tense, and her eyes carried a nervous uncertainty. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside and allowed her inside. She sat down on the couch, clasping her hands together as though gathering courage. I shouldn't have said what I said that night, she admitted. My mom went too far with the jokes, and I defended her without thinking. She looked down before adding softly, the restaurant bill was over $2,000. I nodded slowly. Respect is free, I said gently. But disrespect can become very expensive. Tears appeared in her eyes as she whispered, I'm sorry. I believed she meant it, but forgiveness, I knew, would take time. Because sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones people remember the longest.